Welcome everyone to our today's webinar, which has a nice topic. I like to actually to use this phrase a lot in the context of driving. It's like safe to fail and ready to drive. And today we have a lot of expertise with Rich in driving simulation best practices. Before we start, I would like to give you a good introduction, which I have to read because Rich has so much done in his life that I want to have it precise. That's why I'm reading this. So welcome, Rich, to the webinar, and thank you for taking the time and talking about your experience with SANDI, but also working with people with autism, ADHD, and similar. But let me talk a little bit about yourself. You bring a unique blend of military service, technology, and hands-on driver education with. You're a Florida native and a US Navy veteran, have served on submarines before you retired in 2000. After your military career, you spent many years at Intel, where you earned the Intel Achievement Award for contributions to advanced technology. Wow, wow, hear, hear. In 2018, you and your wife, Wendy, founded Columbia River Driver Education in Oregon, where you became known for integrating fully immersive virtual reality into driver education, well ahead of the curve. And you have presented at national driver safety conferences. You served on the Oregon Governor's Driver Education Advisory Committee, and you still remain active with the ADSI at both the national and state levels. And you are now back in Florida, which is freezing cold, as we now heard, and you are sitting in a coat because it's cold where you are right now. And you work with ASD Drive Ready, and you support individuals with ASD, ADHD, and anxiety through safe-to-fail driving simulation focused on confidence, readiness, and independence. Thank you for being here. And let's just dive into the first question. Rich, give us a little bit more context about ASD Drive Ready and who do you serve? What are the common driving challenges? And how does this fit into vocational rehabilitation and life skills?
So that's a big question. So let me kind of unpack a little bit in the beginning. As we were just mentioning, I had a full service driver education business in Oregon that did both in-car virtual reality and classroom instruction. And when Wendy and I decided to start that business, and I went through the driver education licensing program, when I went through to become a licensed instructor, one of the things that really struck me was that I was being taught to teach driver education the same way I was taught as a student back in the 70s. And I thought it is ridiculous that we haven't embraced technology in this instruction when we've embraced technology every other part of our lives. I mean, we can't think of any other part of our life that hasn't changed since 1975, to 2018 at the time, 2018, 2019. Like you just think about talking on the phone and how it used to be wired to the wall and the cord was only so long, or anything else you did in your life. You had three channels, you had to get up and change them manually, right? Everything else changed because of technology, but yet driver education was stuck in this time warp. And Wendy and I, talking about it, just thought that just doesn't make any sense, especially when we both had this technology background at Intel, and we knew that there's got to be a better way to do this. And luckily, we found a program that was featured virtual reality that we could use at the time. VR Motion was founded by some friends of ours, or coworkers of Wendy's at at Intel, and we said, geez, we should be able to use that to improve our in-car instruction. Now, anybody who has a driver education business knows that the bottleneck is always the car. And you really need to get the most out of that in-car instruction. And that was our goal with virtual reality. We said if we could train them first in virtual reality before we put them in the car. So we would do the classroom instruction, then they would do virtual reality, then we would put them in the car. We could get a lot more out of that in-car training. And that was very true with our neurotypical students. And it worked out great. We were advancing students farther, faster in the car than any of the contemporary companies around us. And Oregon has very standardized education. Everybody uses the same instruction manual. Everybody has the same types of drives. But our students started outperforming, like really outperforming the other companies around us. And the state took notice of it. And uh, the first kind of experience that I had with a neurodiverse student was, and I'm sure this will resonate with anybody who has a driver education background, was when I was sitting in the car with the first student that I had that had really severe ADHD. And as we're driving, you know, and I was instructing her the same way that I had instructed all my other students, but things were things were just not clicking. She's not noticing the traffic light change. She's distracted by different things going on, signs or people walking down the street or the dog that someone's walking. And I just thought this is really unsafe. And so that's when I said, well, wait a minute, I've got this virtual reality equipment. I've got this student that has this particular need. Let me figure out how I can use this to solve the problem that I have. So it became not only we're using it for our neurotypical students to move them along farther, faster, but how can I use this technology to help this student that's you know that has a particular problem? And so what we started doing is really working communication driving with her in virtual reality. It so happened, we were in a very small community in Oregon, and she lived only a few miles from our house. And so I just contacted the parents and said, start bringing her over after dinner. Start just after dinner, bring her over. We've got a VR setup in our living room, which my wife really loved. And bring her over. We'll just run her through some virtual reality every night, and we'll have her work on communication driving. And as long as we could keep her talking about what she was seeing, talking about the dangers that she was noticing, uh, she could stay focused. And so we got that. Once we got her to where she could drive safely in virtual reality, okay, now let's go back into the car and let's get you, safer in the car, doing the same thing in the car. And so we saw how it could translate really easily from what we're doing in virtual reality to what we're seeing in the car. Well, after we had several more students with ADHD coming through, and we used this approach to use virtual reality to prepare them for in-car driving, we were actually approached by the state concerning a student that had autism. Said we've got this young man, he's got autism, and because of that, he's unable to drive. But we're wondering whether or not you think you could teach him, given the fact that you've got this virtual reality set up. And I knew nothing about autism at the time. And so I said, well, let me do some research first. Let me educate myself. And then I said, yeah, you know what? Let's give it a try. Now, I'll say this again. Anybody who owns a driver education business knows that as I said, the car is the bottleneck, and if you lose a car, you take a car out of service, you're you have got a bunch of problems all of a sudden. I've got to reschedule a bunch of students. It changes your whole schedule around. So I would not have agreed to do this for this state had we not had virtual reality, because with virtual reality, okay, I can put the student in virtual reality. We can see how well they drive, and I'm not putting my cars at risk. And so it not only opened up an opportunity for me as an instructor, but it opened up an opportunity for this individual, right? Because if it hadn't been for virtual reality, there's no way we would have gone past that initial phone call. But because we were able to put him in virtual reality and teach him to drive and have him, understand how to make his left and right turns and how to prepare to be in the car, once he got to a level where, he became proficient at those turns and became proficient at maintaining speed and became proficient at starting to pick up dangers and doing searches, well, then I was able to take him out into the car and I felt quite comfortable doing so. And, it took a little bit longer than it would have taken, our typical student to go through the program. I think he ended up doing probably about 20 hours, both in virtual reality and in the car, frankly. I mean, we increased his process in both. And, but that young man was able to obtain his license, and then he was able to go get a job, right? So it opened a pathway to independence, and seeing the change and the difference that it made in his life kind of shifted my focus a little bit, and it became where all I did in my company was work with students that had autism or students that had severe ADHD, and I had my our employees handle everyone else, and it really became kind of a passion for us. Now, when we got to the point where it was time for us to relocate to Florida, we sold Columbia River Driver Education. When we first got to Florida, we kind of took a break, took some time to see what we wanted to do, but and but I still had the equipment and still had the knowledge, and after about a year or so, 2 years of sitting at home, I realized I still had the passion that I wanted to help, but I didn't want to do in-car instruction anymore. I wanted to be closer to retirement than in-car driving with students puts you, but I still wanted to contribute, and so we came up with the idea of ASD Drive Ready. So with ASD Drive Ready, all we do is virtual reality training. That is the sum total of what we do. We don't do classroom instruction, or we don't do conventional classroom instruction where you would have lots of students and, a student, an instructor in the front with a chalkboard or something. We don't do that kind of instruction. Everything that we do is one-on-one. So we do some classroom type instruction where I'll go through the driver manual or answer questions or work through some problems outside of the simulator with the students. But mostly our focus is, let's use the simulation to help people get ready to the point where they can get in the car with an instructor and start driving. And so that's the focus of what we do. And I've probably spoken long enough about this that I've forgotten the rest of your question, Jan. So
No, it's super interesting. My question is, since you started that in Florida, do you see till then, or from then till now, an increase in people approaching you with this specific model of driver's education?
So it's really interesting, actually. We opened the business about a year ago. Is when we started the business, and frankly, for the first 5 months, we got crickets. It was very limited. We ended up with one student who heard about us through the local Center for Autism Related Disabilities. We had gone and done some presentations for them. And one of the nurses that worked adjacent to them heard about it and contacted us, and we started working with her son. And so we just had a single student for a while, and then we were able to connect with the University of Central Florida's Center for Autism Related Disabilities. They're in Orlando, and the director there was very excited about the possibility for the program. And so we ended up doing an informational night for the families down there. And we went from having, a student to having about 26 students virtually overnight. We did a parent night and we had more than 20 signups. We did 40 evaluations over the course of the first week we were down there. And some families, didn't sign up simply because of the cost related or needing to get set up with the vocational rehabilitation funds. And so some of those parents are moving in now to actually starting to sign up for the training. But since we've got that program going in Central Florida, and it is successful, I think beyond even what Dr. Daly thought that it was going to be, both in the numbers that we've had, and we started that, and we had the parent night in September, did a week of evaluations the end of September, so really started doing the training in October, and we just sent our first four, I guess we would call them graduates, down to Florida Safety Council to start in-car driving. And so the fact that some people were able to move through that quickly, I think has surprised both Dr. Daly and frankly some of the parents. And so we're really starting to see some momentum. But because of that success, now we're being asked to, hey, can you implement a similar program at Florida State University, their Center for Autism Related Disabilities, and can you implement a similar program in Jacksonville? And so we have gone from crickets to 1 to 20 to I'm doing 3 parent nights this month to bring more students in.
But I think that is some sort of advice that you could give to others out there, because when I hear what you say is that you tapped into the, I would say, ecosystem of the caregivers and into the autistic universe, if you so will. And then it went like a wildfire and a word of mouth and all of that. So you took this initiative to tap into the, let's say, autism community and said, here I am, this is what we do. And that accelerated your growth.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think it's the only caveat I would put onto that is we had tapped into the Center for Autism Related Disabilities here in Gainesville, but I think you need to find who's going to be a strong advocate within that community for you, right? So the first one that we tapped into, they were excited to learn about it, and they were happy to share it, but I don't think they've been as strong, I don't think they embrace it as this is a real game changer. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens in a lot of places, because people don't know what they don't know, is I think the saying that my wife likes to use a lot, right? And because it's brand new, and people aren't familiar with it, so they're not sure, well, how does this work, and how do I become a proponent for something that I'm not really sure that it works, and so I think, yeah, I think you need to find someone who, don't just tap into one community. It would be the advice. Tap into as many different communities that do autism as you can. Like I said, we started off, we just tapped into the local, and we kind of waited for something to grow. And it wasn't until I kind of went out and really beat the bushes a little bit and went to a bunch of different places that I finally got somebody who came back and said, wait a minute, explain this again. And by then, that one, we had plenty of video of their progress. And so I could share that video. So Dr. Daly was able to see it and it clicked with her. Okay, I get what you're doing. Yeah, I'm a strong proponent. And I want to advertise this to my families. And so that would be the advice is don't just tap into one place, tap into many and, uh, and kind of have it helps if you can have some video to share so that they can visualize instead of just hearing you say, hey, this is a great program, this is how it worked, but to be able to see it. I think that is part of the magic, I believe, there.
I think so that this is a journey in itself, but let's say webinars or let's say conversation that we have right now, and you are, and that is what I'm looking for. You have also statistics with you that you are about to share. So, but first of all, I would like to ask, you were starting with virtual reality only kind of approach, and what was the add-on that, for example, SANDI gave to your program? So maybe you can explain this a little bit.
So we've, like as I said, we've had virtual reality program for a while, and it worked really well. I think at teaching the basics of driver education, right? Teaching how to make right and left turns, how to brake, you know, and it has some other benefits that it had. But what we didn't get through that we get through SANDI that I just love, and it has become, you know, a real game changer for us, I believe, is the amount of traffic and the amount of driving scenarios that we can put people in now, right? We can have them driving in fairly heavy traffic. Uh, you know, just like everything, we start them off, you know, with no traffic, limited, traffic, and have them learn how to control the vehicle. But then we slowly introduce traffic, slowly introduce other distractions, and then and you can control that to the level that the student's ready to receive, right? So you can dial the traffic down a little bit. You can make sure that they're not having, pedestrians crossing in front of them or whatever. And then as they are starting to okay, I can handle at this level, we can stretch them a little bit more. Let's add in a little bit more traffic, or let's add in multi-lane roads, or let's add in one ways, or let's add in, you know, people who are broken down so that they have to demonstrate that they understand the move over law. We can add in all of those things and really prepare them for driving. What we did in the VR motion that we had in Oregon that we still use for teaching the basics of driving, it worked okay where we were at because we were way out in the country. It would not fully prepare somebody who's going to be driving in Orlando. And so we feel like with SANDI, we better prepare our students that are going to be driving in Orlando. There's students that are going to be driving in Jacksonville, Miami, Tampa, for the kind of traffic patterns that they're going to see. The typical surface road in Orlando is probably 3 lanes. I mean, in each direction, right? So the students have to be able to drive on a multi-lane road and understand everything that goes into changing lanes and getting into the correct lane for that turn that's coming up ahead, doing all of those things. And so we're able to prep the students that way. And SANDI has been the game changer that's allowed us to do that. And so, but I do want to say, Sandy's the platform, and it's a good platform, right? But what you need in place is a good process as well to go with that platform. And so you need to make sure you've got a good plan in advance of, you know, so you know what you're going to be teaching, when you're going to be teaching it, and how you're going to go about teaching those things using the platforms, the software platforms that are available. But and we believe in virtual reality because and we do that exclusively because we just think that there have been so many studies that say that virtual reality writes to the same part of the brain as actual reality does. And we have lived it with our program in Oregon where we saw, students would do something in virtual reality. And then when they're out driving in the car, they would actually bring up spontaneously, oh, hey, I understand this situation. We did this in virtual reality. And so this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and it's a huge difference. It makes a big difference for the students.
Well, that's good to hear. I might add one funny and unexpected event where I was showing Sandy in a demo. I was driving actually. I did somehow both driving and explaining, and there was a fire truck coming from behind. So I was supposed to stop the car, and the fire truck ran across or drove across the intersection and ran into another car. So there was an accident, meaning you don't know what you get because it's very random. But this is the closest I've never experienced myself, a fire truck running into a car while I'm driving. But hey, this is what happens, can happen. So this is something unexpected, which I like the most as well at this. And I want to make some, where is it? Oh, it's here. It's under my laptop. So you have a good program, you have a good curriculum, everything is working just fine. But if you start from scratch, I have to do a advertisement blog. We are partnering with a university, State University of San Diego, and they have created a program, a curriculum alongside of SANDI. So if you are in the process of starting SANDI from scratch, as Rich did a couple of years back, STEER could be something that could help you. But let's go to the next topic. I would like to understand now, since you introduced or restarted in Florida the VR only education and then added SANDI to the program. I'm very curious about the questionnaire and the statistics that you got off a questionnaire that you just received and got the results, which is super interesting.
Sure, I can share this. Let me share screen here. So what we did was at the end of, I'm hoping everybody's seeing the screen now, but what we did was we had, and you'll see it's small numbers, it's 15 responses, but this is people who participated in our program in Q4 of last year. So they had to be a student during Q4 of last year that did at least 8 training sessions with us. So the pool of available clients was about 20 that had done that many. So we got about a 75% response rate. So not huge in terms of number, but pretty good in terms of response rate. And so just to give you an idea, this is the people who had learner's licenses. This is the group that had no learner's license or permit. And then we had a small group that were licensed but not yet driving independently. And one advantage of working with virtual reality is the students don't have to have their permit yet. And in fact, one of the things that we're seeing is that some of the training grounds is the students are better grounded in the training when they're actually able to practice it. And so we can teach a topic for them, to them, explain it to them, make sure they understand it, and then allow them to practice that immediately. And so there's no requirement that they have to have a permit to start in our program. And you can see almost half of our students don't have one. Now, when we're looking at the numbers here, I just want to point out that the one was always, the lowest uh, category. So in this case, it was very dissatisfied. The five was very satisfied. Um, and so this just talks about our training. So I guess I'm just bragging about our particular program right now. But these, I think, are the ones that really resonate. How effective has the program been in building driving skills? Again, the one would be not at all effective, and five was extremely effective. And you can see all 15 put us either at a four or a five. And then how realistic does the experience feel? One was not at all realistic, five was very realistic, and you can see we've got a mix from three to five. But I'm pretty pleased with this four and five numbers, because the one thing that we're not doing in virtual reality is giving them the car motion, right? You can use the steering motor to give them a little bit of feedback for, hitting a pothole or driving over a railroad track or something like that. You can give them a little bit of feedback, but they're not feeling the motion of the car, the acceleration of the braking of the car. And so for them to say it was that realistic, I think made us feel pretty good. But this is, I think, where the money is. Um, Before they started, how anxious was the student about driving? So one was not at all anxious, and you can see we had a couple students that said that they weren't at all anxious. Five was extremely anxious, and so you can see that we had a pretty good smattering, but 10 of the 15 were either four or five, right? So quite anxious. And then after participating, how anxious is your student about driving now? You can see that that extremely anxious number went down to zero, and all of the numbers shifted down. Now, the two that weren't anxious before, luckily we didn't make them anxious, so I guess that part's good. But you can see how all of these numbers just kind of shifted down into that lower category. So the students are feeling more prepared, and you can kind of translate that into confidence. And in fact, that's the next question. How does the training feel more confident about driving? And you'll see the two that weren't anxious, they didn't get any more confident. But look at everyone else, right? We've got four and five, five being, now they're extremely confident. And so I'm a little worried about this, whoever this one student is, because I don't want them to be overly confident about driving in the car, right? But to feel confident enough to get in the car, I think is a good thing. And then here we wanted to see, what changes would the people most like. And if you read through these, what you'll see is, luckily there's a bunch of people say, hey, you don't need to change anything, but everything else is about give me more. Either make the sessions longer, give me more sessions, make more days available. And, would you recommend it? I was glad to see that everybody's at the higher end. But then we just left them free write whatever they wanted to. And we got 11 responses here. But if you go through and look at these, a couple of the responses were about, hey, we'd like turn indicators, and would like, other things that we could have to make it a little bit more realistic. And I appreciate that. With the system, with the steering motor that I use, SANDI doesn't have the turn indicators. I think you can do it if you use the smaller wheel, the Logitech wheel, but the Fanatec that I use, it's not available. But everything else in here is about, again, it's about that give me more. And so we're pretty pleased with the results that we got.
Um, I can say the same. So, which basically validates what we pre-launched with Sandy in June last year. we're hoping for, a validation of the statistics and the research we did 2 years before. So I'm happy to hear that. And before we go into the Q&A part, I just want to ask some questions that I've been asked a lot when someone is on the fence and shall I introduce to my driving community, SANDI? Maybe you have some practical details. So how long is a session? And if you may share this with us, how much do you charge so that people get an idea of how long is long enough? And really important is what kind of progress, what makes you at some point to say you got it in you and now you can go into the real world car. So maybe you can share this a bit.
Sure. So let's work through all of those. So our sessions are 45 minutes with the student. We typically we take about a minute to 2 minutes in the beginning to kind of brief them on what we're going to cover. So we always like to prepare them for what they're going to be doing. So, typically I'll start with, hey, I reviewed what we did last time. This is what we did. These are the things we were going to work on when you came back, because we always do a debrief at the end. So these are the things that we thought we were going to work on. So that's what we're going to be doing. And I give them a brief about the first scenario I'm going to put them in. Okay. So, for example, if I was going to start them in, Sandy's rural one drive, I'd say, okay, I'm going to put you on a road that doesn't have a lot of turns in it, but it's got a huge number of curves. And so you're going to treat the curves similar to turns, only you're not going to want to put in as much steering motion. You may need, now you're going to see the speed limit, but remember, we set the speed limits for straightaways. It would cost too much money for the state to go in and put a speed sign for every single curve that's in the road. So what we want you to do is exercise some judgment, look at the curve, and determine how much you need to slow down below the speed limit to be able to go through that curve. And then you're going to have to determine how much steering input you're going to put in to go through the curve. So something like that. So really quick. My goal is to have the student in the headset and driving within 2 minutes of them coming into the room. So I don't want to have a long conversation with them. I want to get them sit down, give them a brief, this is what we're going to be working on, and get them going. And so get them in the headset, get them sit down, get them driving. And then I'll try and have them drive for about 40 minutes. Now, as you know, none of the scenarios are 40 minutes long, right? So what's going to happen is they're going to finish a scenario. Hopefully they'll go through, they'll finish it successfully, and then I'm just going to, give them a quick conversation, and we'll go into another scenario. Okay. Now, let's go back to the how do you know where they're progressing and what to do with them, right? And that is, to me, that is the difference between that this is the platform and this is the program, right? So, for example, for me, I'm going to start them working on turns. So in the very beginning, that's what they're going to be working on. They're going to be working on right and left turns. And I always start them with left turns because left turns are more forgiving than right turns. They've got more room to turn because they've got that lane that's between them and where they're turning to. So we'll have them start with, turns. And what I'm looking for is for them to make, 4 consecutive left turns without coaching. Right. So in the beginning, I'm having to coach the students on how to make left turns. And I use the pull push method of steering. That's the easiest one for me to teach them how to use. And so I'll have them do that until they can make 4 consecutive left turns. And then, okay, now we're going to start right turns. And right turns, you're going to have to set them up a little bit, sooner, because you're turning immediately into that lane that's right there. And so it's less forgiving. And the same thing, we'll work them through those 4 consecutive right turns. And then, that is the marker that I would use to determine, okay, now you're ready to move to the next thing. And so that's when I would move them, say, to the SANDI Rural 1 would be, okay, you've demonstrated that you can make some curves. So now let's put you on a scenario where you're going to be driving a little bit longer and you're going to have these curves. Now, the other thing that's very different, and this is important for instructors to understand, is the goal of virtual reality is that whole it's safe to fail, right? That's the whole idea here. And so we want to allow them to experience failure. Now, one of the things that I'll say is, you know, in my own personal life, I've learned a lot more from the times that I've failed than I have from the things that have been really easy to me, right? And I think that's true for students as well. But as driving instructors, we have it ingrained in us from the moment we start that instruction that we need to intervene prior to failure, right? Because we're usually in a real car and we don't want them to ruin our real car. We don't want the student to get injured. We don't want anybody else to get injured. There's so many liability issues. So driving instructors are inherently proactive, and we need to have them switch that off when they start working with students in virtual reality. Now, in the beginning, you may be coaching, you may be doing a lot of coaching as they're going through, right? Because you're trying to get them to do something they've never done before. But as they start to develop proficiency, one of the ways that I determine that it's time for me to move them to the next scenario is when they're able to go through and do it, and I didn't have to talk to them. So, for example, when they start in that on that really curvy drive, and for those of you who haven't seen that Sandy Rural 1 drive, you should make sure you set up something with Jan so he can demonstrate that for you, because that is a very curvy road. It would be a very typical Oregon mountain rural road. You know, lots and lots of really sharp curves. And the first time they're going through that, if I'm watching them, am I saying, you know, am I having to coach them to slow down for the curve? Am I having to coach them to put in more steering input? If so, I'm going to keep them in that scenario a little bit longer. But when they're able to drive through that all on their own, then it's time to progress them. And so it's a matter of watching them, uh, seeing how well they progress, and then realizing they're progressing through this without me coaching them. That's when it's time to bump up the the level a little bit. Right now, it's time to introduce them to traffic, or to introduce them to a lot more turns. And so it's a slow progression that really, when you set your program up, you're going to have to work through. These are the markers I'm going to use, but the kind of things that I use is how successful are they at doing the scenario without me coaching them, without me interrupting them? Can they get through? You know, and there are some markers that I see. Like in Sandy interrupts you if you've done something, and there may be sometimes where the student is just going through the intersection too slowly, and it says, hey, the light cycled to red while you were in the intersection or something like that, right? Where I'll like give the student a pass on that. Yeah, hey, this is what happened. You entered, it was green. You're just going through really slowly because you're working on your progression. I'm going to give you a pass on that. But if they're driving through when it's red, or they're missing the stop signs, that's a bigger deal to me. And so I'm not going to progress them at that point. So it's looking at those markers of what are they able to do on their own, and as soon as they get to a level where they can perform with some level of proficiency, then it's definitely time to make it a little bit harder for them. Now, anybody who's worked with people with autism they call it a spectrum, because it really is one, right? It is, it doesn't matter how wide you can hold your arms apart, the spectrum is that wide. So you can't say a typical student takes this because there is no such thing as a typical autism student. Okay, I just want to make that really clear. But well, what I've found is we can kind of bucket what we're seeing to where we've got some students who, 10 sessions and they're ready to move into in-car training. Now, that doesn't mean they should be done with virtual reality training. That means they're ready to move into in-car training, right? And when you move them into in-car training, you should say, hey, um, I want them, I give the in-car instructors, when I hand them off to the companies that do their in-car training, I give them some guidelines. Hey, I think they should start off, residential roads, no more than this speed, this kind of thing. After they've done 2 hours of that, then I think it would be okay to put them on these kind of roads, you know, but, but don't put them on these types of roads until we've done more in virtual reality. And so I'm very specific when I do that handoff of what they do. But kind of, I've got some that I would say would bucket in that 10 sessions, some that bucket in like 20 sessions, and then I've got some that are going to be 40 to 60 sessions. And it's just that's kind of where the bucket is
Based on your
now.
assessment or based throughout, so you switch then the buckets at some point, or you offer them right away in these three bucket
So,
packages?
so what we offer is 10. Our packages are 10 and 20, right? That's what we offer them. But there are some people that I can, just based on my experience working with the numbers that I've worked with now, I can tell the parents in the beginning, hey, you know, based on what I'm seeing right now, I believe your child is going to be in that 40 sessions. I think we should do 20 sessions, reevaluate where they're at, and then you can make the decision. Do you want them to do another 20 sessions, or do you want to, do you think that they've made enough progress, right? Because
And add more modules along the way if needed, basically.
exactly, yeah. So we'll have markers where we'll set up and say, hey, this is where we're going to stop doing it. Kind of see where we're at, and everybody take a breath, and then decide whether we want to go more or not. Because I mean, determining whether or not someone can get all the way to their licensing, that's a very inexact, it's a very inexact science, right? You're kind of looking and making a judgment off of 45 minutes with a student. Well, what I tell people is because of the way virtual reality works, we're able to err on the side of training. We're able to err on the side of giving the student a chance, as opposed to when you're talking about putting them in a car and putting them out on the road, you have to err on the side of safety. And so your answer for some of these students would absolutely be no, I'm sorry, there's no way you're getting in the car. But in virtual reality, my feeling for a lot, is let's err on the side of giving the student the benefit of the doubt, and giving them the opportunity to demonstrate that they can succeed. Now, there are some cases, and I just want to be very clear on this. There are some times that someone will come in for an evaluation with me that I have to have the conversation with the parent that, look, I'm sorry, based on what I'm seeing, we could do 100 sessions of training, and I'm not sure that I would, at the end of that, recommend, that they get in a car and start driving. And that's a tough conversation that you have to have. But what I found is a lot of parents have turned back around and said, "Do you mind if we keep going? Do you mind?" Or we've tried 10 sessions, and I'm like, well, I'm not seeing a lot of improvement. But what the parents will come back and say is, first of all, they are so looking forward to coming in and doing the training. Like the clients are so interested in coming in and sitting down and getting that experience as if they're driving. They look forward to it. And so, the parents are like, if we, can we keep going? And I've had some parents that have come back, and said, hey, do you think we could get them to the point where they could drive a golf cart around in our gated community? And I'm like, well, that's a much lower bar than trying to get them a driver's license, right? So, um, but but again, to me, the key is it's an opportunity for these for these young people to get to a point of independence that never existed for them before, and it's you know it allows I go back to that very first client that with autism that we had, right. Here was a young man who had an autism diagnosis, had a fear of driving, but had a college degree, right. He was able to work through and get himself a college degree. And now, I mean, before he started training with us, his options for getting a job were none. Right. He was basically self isolated, completed college. Now he's self isolated at home because he there's no way for him to get a job. He can't doesn't have transportation. So what is he going to do for a living? And so instead, he's receiving benefits from the state. Uh, you know, and essentially that would be the rest of his life. And because he was able to go through and become licensed, now he's got a job with the Tualatin Valley School District in Oregon. He's a taxpayer. And he has a level of independence, and he has that pride that we all have, that we all get when we're able to develop that independent life. And so I'm a big proponent of use virtual reality to say yes, and where before, if it was your car and your business, you would have to say no.
There were some remarkable closing remarks to this section. So thank you very much, Rich, for now. And now we are, if any, switching to Q&A. So if someone, and I don't have the overview of who is in that chat, but if there are questions, then please write them down and I will address them to Rich. If people are shy, I have one more question I would like to ask. You were talking about that there is a spectrum as long as you can, let's say, stretch your arms, which is true. But from in my experience, I encountered a lot of, let's say, older, and when I say older students, I mean in the late 20s, early 30s, who said, I feel encouraged now to get my driver's license. So can you share some experience of not the typical 15, 16, 17-year-olds, so way older, let's say, students who want to get their driver's license?
So our median student age is 24.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah, that's that's what we see. A lot of of 20 somethings. I think my oldest student is 34. I think 34 is my oldest student. I've only got, I think, two, maybe three teenagers in my program.
Okay. That actually is what I thought as well, that there is actually no limit to that. And we have two questions, one from Christine. She's asking, do you have used a monitor at all instead of VR headset? And can you talk a little bit about the pricing? I think she means how much do you charge for the modules?
Sure. So the pricing is the easiest one to handle. So we do variable pricing based on where we're doing the training at. So, we live in Gainesville, And so, in my office in Gainesville is, a mile and a half from my house. And so that is our lowest rate. And our base rate there, I think, is $75 an hour. We do give a slight discount for the 10-hour package and a slight discount for the 20-hour or the 20 session package, right? So it's that's the base. When I'm going to Orlando, for example, because that involves so much travel and there's overnights involved with that where when I'll do 2 days of training in a row, I'll have to get a hotel room type thing. So there I think our base rate is $95 an hour, and so we give discounts again based on the 10 session package or 20 session package off that, um, which is we try to we really try our best to make it very as affordable as we possibly can. I can say that there are other programs that do that start with in-car training, but for people who are on the spectrum, and those programs are about 2 times what we charge.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then what was the other part of the question besides the pricing?
No, if you used also at some
Oh,
monitor instead of VR headset or never.
so I don't do the flat panel. I know a lot of people do. To me, the difference in the training is significant enough to where I try not to. I guess if I had a student who really needed the who really needed the training, who just couldn't do virtual reality, I might try the flat panel for them just to try and get them some experience. But I'm a real proponent for fully immersive virtual reality, and the reason that I am is because of the difference in the way that it writes to the memory, right? University of Maryland, there have been several studies that say that virtual reality writes to the memory banks exactly the same way that actual reality does. And so, like when I have my students do an over the shoulder check, I want them to actually look over their shoulder, look out the window, and see what's over there. And, if you're doing flat panel, you just can't do that.
Correct. And you're right. Some prefer the two-screen approach, and you are a proponent of the VR. But it's good that this is optional for everyone who has the need to, let's say, get the best outcome for the specific student. So
Mm-hmm.
I have a follow-up question. What do you do in the evaluation? How long is the evaluation?
So our evaluations are the same 45 minutes. So for me, for the evaluation, and in our program, we don't use SANDI for the evaluation. We use the VR Motion program. We have them, but SANDI has a scenario that would work very much the same. The first thing we do is we just want them to drive on basically a straight highway or fairly straight highway road. It can have hills and slight curves in it, but we want them to drive on that, and we're evaluating both how far they're looking ahead of their vehicle, how well they can maintain their vehicle inside their lane, but we're also evaluating how well can they handle virtual reality, right? So as they're doing this, at like the 2 minute point, the 5 minute point, I'm asking them, how do you feel? And I tell them beforehand, hey, there's a small percentage of people that get a little bit of motion discomfort in virtual reality. You may be in that group. We don't know yet. So when I'm asking you, how do you feel? What I'm really asking you is, are you getting nauseous? Are you getting motion discomfort? And, and so the students are prepared for that. And I will say with ASD Drive Ready, the number of clients that I've had that have felt motion discomfort is 0 so far. So kind of knock on wood on that.
Right.
I've had some folk rehab counselors and some other people that have said, "Hey, can I try it?" And I put them in it. And they're like, "Oh man, this is," but I think the research tends to show that the younger you are, the less likely you are to get the motion discomfort. And so far it hasn't been an issue with our clients. But then after we do that, then the next thing that I do is I put them in a scenario where they show me how well they can do right and left turns from the beginning. And so that's kind of what I'm looking at. And what you can see is, first of all, you can see how nervous they are, right? You can see what level of anxiety that they have. You can also get a good measure of what kind of just basic coordination skills that they have from that. And so uh, that is pretty much what our initial evaluation kind of comprises, is just how well can they handle the car going straight, looking deep, how well can they make right and left turns from the beginning. And I'll even give them a quick you know discussion about making turns, and then I'll see whether or not they can follow that. And from that, we can kind of see where they're at, and just based on the number of people I've worked with now through with virtual reality, I can get a pretty good feel from that on, hey, is this going to be a what I would call a 10 session client? Is this going to be a 20 session client? Or is this going to be what I term a longer term case?
Yes.
And that's the conversation we have at that point.
We have one last question. Do the series of videos progressively get more challenging? What is the frequency of sessions? And
So we really encourage our students to do a minimum of one session per week. Right? That's our goal. One session per week is the minimum. I have some, there are some weeks that I'm in Orlando 3 days, and have had some clients that have been there all 3 days. Right? That's it kind of depends on how motivated the client is, and I think anybody who's had a driver education business knows that you have different levels of interest, and um, so, but a minimum of once a week. If what I'm finding is, even I do a lot of instruction at the colleges. That's when I'm in Orlando, I'm at the colleges, and they shut down for Christmas break, right? Because everybody goes back home and they go on with their life, and during Christmas break, and the amount of drop off that I saw, it we basically that first week or two back was trying to get students back to where they were before, as opposed to continuing progress. So you see some drop off, and so I really recommend a minimum of once per week.
gotcha. I think we respectful to your time. Oh, I just got a last minute question, Christine.
I'm seeing here for feedback from the driving schools. Okay, I'll give you. I'll tell you a story, a quick story. I'll try and make it brief because I know everybody's trying to get out of here. But and then I'll tell you a real time story that happened to me just recently. So my history has been, sorry, as a driving school owner in the past, when we were just working with neurotypical students, my instructors got to the point where they did not want to teach students who couldn't do virtual reality. If we had someone who couldn't handle virtual reality and they didn't get that instruction, they did not want to get in the car with them. And I would end up doing those drives for them. And I think I had a conversation with Guy recently about he has a similar story, just with regular in-car instruction, that how the instructors they get so used to people doing something and having a base level of knowledge that's how they feel. But when I started working with Florida Safety Council in Orlando to take the students over, right, to pick up our students who were out of virtual reality and take them in car with them. They're a nonprofit. They've got a board of directors, And even though the chief executive was fully on board, fully on board, the board was like, "Hey, we think this is a big liability. We don't want to have our instructors driving around, with a bunch of clients with autism. That puts us at risk." And so the chief executive asked me to come in and do a presentation for the board. So I came in, I set my equipment up in the board meeting, showed them what we're teaching the clients, showed them the level of preparation, played a video of one of my clients who went from not being able to make a left turn successfully. Every single time he tried, he ran off the side of the road and hit something, to now driving in freeway traffic thanks to the SANDI software, right? And with cars all around him, and it's clearly the same student. And when it came up, hey, are we going to vote to allow this or not? Not only was it unanimous, yes, we're going to do this, but one of the board members spontaneously said, I still think we have a liability issue, but the liability issue is, now that we know that this software exists, now that we know that this program exists, how can we justify putting high school kids that come to us with their voucher that all they've done is the classroom education? How can we justify putting them on the road
Good
without
point.
putting them through this? So, that's been the response that the driving schools have, is they get a student who, and just think about your driving program, whatever program you run. Think about the difference between putting someone who's done 20, anywhere from, 10 to 20 almost hours of turns, stopping at stop signs, responding correctly to traffic signals, merging into traffic, changing lanes. They've done all of that, versus someone who has just sat in a classroom and read about driving. Which one would you rather put in your car? And that's the response that we get from the driving schools.
Which is a really good closing statement, because I feel strongly with you in that, and I totally agree. And but respectfully to your time, you all, I would say thank you so much, Rich, for taking the time and explaining everything from your perspective, showing us results and data and experience for the most part. And I'm very happy that you are doing this. And we will, of course, we have recorded this and we will send this out. And also for the audience, thank you so much for listening in, and have a great rest of your evening. Thank you so much.